Hello, everyone. This is Mark C. Crowley, and you're listening to the Lead from the Heart podcast. My guest today is Shawn Achor, one of the world's leading researchers and thinkers on happiness, human potential, positive psychology, and performance. Many people first came to know Shawn through his groundbreaking book, The Happiness Advantage, which became an international bestseller and helped introduce millions of people to the idea that success does not create happiness, nearly as much as happiness fuels success. His TED Talk, The Happy Secret to Better Work, is one of the most viewed TED Talks of all time with over 25 million views worldwide. Today, we're going to discuss his new book, The Power of Belief, which explores a subject that philosophers, psychologists, theologians, and scientists have wrestled with for centuries: the extraordinary influence our beliefs have on the lives we ultimately create. What makes Shawn's work especially compelling is that he doesn't approach beliefs as abstract philosophy or wishful thinking. He approaches them through research, behavioral science, neuroscience, organizational psychology, and human experience. In his book, Shawn argues that beliefs are far more than thoughts floating around in our heads. They shape what we notice, how we interpret adversity, what goals we pursue, what possibilities we consider available to us, and even how connected, capable, hopeful, and meaningful our lives feel. Common beliefs like, I'm not good enough, or we should probably play it safe, or I'm not ready, are no less powerful in limiting the lives and careers that we could be having. And because beliefs don't simply influence what we think, they influence what we notice, what we expect from life, what challenges we believe we can overcome, what possibilities we pursue, and even whether we experience meaning, hope, agency, and connection in difficult moments. In many ways, our beliefs quietly become the architecture of our emotional lives. So today, Shawn and I are going to explore the fascinating intersection between beliefs, leadership, human well-being, and organizational culture, and discuss how the stories people repeatedly tell themselves may quietly become the realities they eventually live. And with that, let's welcome Shawn Achor to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's an honor for me to have you. Thank you for agreeing to do this. Thank you for joining me. Congratulations on yet another hugely successful book. Let's get started with the big picture. What influenced you to write this? And in a nutshell, what's the central takeaway about the power of beliefs, and why are they such powerful drivers of behavior, performance, and the theme of our show, well-being?
Well, I've been interested in beliefs for a long time. So my first book was called The Happiness Advantage. And in it, I was arguing that the research was suggesting that the more positive your brain became, the greater the performance benefits it had on the backside. That as the brain became more positive, every single business and educational outcome we knew how to test for improved dramatically. And what we were seeing was that optimism, hope, compassion, meaning, purpose, those weren't just nice luxury items, that they were actually driving our ability to do our work or to take tests or to be parents or change how long we lived. And so I got fascinated by the idea of how happiness had a role to play within this. But over the past several years, I started realizing that it was much bigger than happiness, that the lens through which you view the world predicts not only our experience of the present, but it predicts what happens next. That all this research that I've been doing and all these incredible researchers across the globe had been doing for the past 2 decades, it showed that our beliefs change the math about what is possible and probable within our lives. But by changing the math, beliefs also change our path as we pursue jobs, as we pursue love, as we age, as we try to raise children. What we were finding was that our beliefs not only were being influenced by our life, but they were predictive of what happened next. So I got fascinated by, are there specific beliefs that are the most predictive beliefs in your life? And if we could strengthen those beliefs, what would happen next in terms of our working lives and our happiness and our well-being? And the deeper I went into this research, I started discovering some pretty remarkable things. One of the very first things that I started uncovering was that, we've had an awareness that the beliefs are powerful, but as we look at how the economy is shaped, or we look at, the home field advantage in sports, or we look at the role and the rise of AI, in each of these situations, what we were finding was that the power of beliefs was actually on the rise in terms of its predictive abilities about what happened next. And as I looked at the world, I also saw that we were hungry for meaning, purpose, and belief, but that we had lost our main access to it. So for all of human history, our beliefs came from four sources. It came from our job, our village, our political structure, and our religious structure. But we've become untethered from all four of those in the modern world just recently. And because of that, it's changed the way that we pursue happiness and success within this world. For example, we don't live in the same village anymore. People scatter across the world for work or for school. And even when we're in the same village, in the United States, American males have 60% lower face-to-face connection than they had just 20 years ago. So the village is disappearing. And Gallup found that only 16% of people want to have the same job next year that they have this year. So we don't even have a connection, a deep connection to our work as we can move from company to company. And even in sports teams, people with the transfer portal can transfer out of colleges just to go play somewhere else. So there's no even connection that we feel there. But if those were our sources of meaning, those institutions or those jobs, we've lost those. And we have the lowest faith and trust in our government that we've had in the past 70 years. And in 2000, only 5% of people in the United States claimed to have no religious beliefs. Today, that's 24%. And what we're finding is that in the midst of this massive shift, this unprecedented in human history, our desire for meaning and purpose has not gone away, but now we've lost those sources of belief. So we cling on to other things. We cling on to influencers who are just as angry or disillusioned as the rest of us. Or we're lonely, so we cling on to OnlyFans subscriptions, or we scroll through social media hoping for connection, but feeling like we're missing out. And what it's done is it's left these scars upon the way that we look at the world. We're starting to believe that our behavior doesn't matter, that we don't matter, that our work is not meaningful, that we have nothing to give, that there's nothing to be grateful for, that there's nothing greater than us. And those beliefs are driving the negatives that we see within our world right now, the burnout, the anxiety, the loneliness, and depression. So the role of this book, The Power of Beliefs, is what happens when we strengthen the opposite side of those negative core beliefs? What if we get someone to believe that their behavior matters, that they matter, that their work is meaningful, that they have something to give, that they have something to be grateful for, that there's something greater than them, that change is possible? Those beliefs shape what happens next. So the core message of the book is if you took the same world, the same maybe broken world, or the same world struggling with a technological revolution, if you take the same world, but you have different beliefs, scientifically, we predict different outcomes. So if you have the same student with ADHD, with the same parents, same school, same condition, but you tweak one belief, the belief that my behavior matters even if I have ADHD, or my behavior doesn't matter because I have ADHD, you get a complete split in what's about to happen to that person in their educational experience. So the book is dedicated to uncovering what are those core beliefs, can we strengthen them, and what happens next?
I would say this is the most comprehensive answer to the first question I've ever asked a guest. I mean, you covered so much ground, and I felt like I was caromming in a pinball machine where everything you're saying, I'm thinking, oh, I need to ask him about this. But you really nailed it down at the end wonderfully, which is that one belief can change outcomes. Beliefs in your world are affirmations as well. And so what we're telling ourselves is what we're ultimately going to be acting upon. And I think that's a really powerful understanding. The one carom in this pinball machine that I want to ask you that has nothing to do with your book, but I know you're going to have an answer to. You talk about optimism and hope and purpose and positivity and the benefits of that. Why is it that Meta, as of today, is sending out 2 a.m. emails to notify people whether they have a job or not? Or Oracle is laying off 30,000 people in one day and telling people that their 20-year career is over in an instant. Or just all of the media that we're seeing is using AI as sort of a threat that, existentially, you're not going to have a job, you're not going to have a career, you're not going to have an income. And we've all sort of bought into this. Why are we leaning so negative?
I think it's a huge question. I think that we're leaning so negative because the inputs coming into our brain are skewed negative. I mean, we get alerts on our watch and our phone for what's going on with a geopolitical conflict or with a shooting at a school. We get alerts on our watches and phones for when a boat runs into a bridge and destroys the bridge. But what we never get is the alert that says the bridge was rebuilt. So our brain is full of these broken bridges. And as a result of that, it skews what we think reality is. When those are our inputs, it allows us or causes us to believe that the world is actually becoming a darker and more dangerous place. I gave a talk that I mentioned in the book 2 or 3 years ago now to a high school, and it was to all these educators and parents, and the superintendent got up and said, "We brought this guy in. He's going to be talking about happiness and optimism, and we certainly need him because our graduates are about to graduate into the worst world we've ever experienced." And I don't like conflict, so I'm hesitant to argue with someone, but I completely disagree with them because our graduates are not graduating into a world war like we were in the 20s and 40s. They're not graduating into a world, into a depression or into even a recession currently. Like they're not graduating into a period of time where we didn't have anesthesia like graduates did, more than 200 years ago, right? We're graduating into a world that has massive challenges where there's job scarcity and job uncertainty and uncertainty wrapped around AI. But if we believe that we're entering into the most dangerous or the darkest period of human history, not only is it not accurate, but it also skews what happens next. One of the statistics that I put in the book that I was shocked to discover is Gallup had been asking people for a while, for many years, do you think that we are in the end times? And 32% of people last year in the United States claimed that we are in the end times. And that was cross religion, cross politics. 1 out of 3 Americans believe that we are in a rapid descent into entropy and an apocalypse. And if that's the case, why would you focus on literary studies? Why would you focus on reading poetry? Or why would you be engaged as you're in a meeting or doing a phone call? Why would you care about the future of kids' education? Why would you bring a child into this world? Those negative beliefs about the world, one, while not true, are also creating true or real impacts on the backside. One of the things that I argue in the book is that beliefs are real even when they're not true. And if someone believes that this world has no jobs, they don't search for them. If they think that people are against you or the companies are constantly out to get you, they don't invest in those companies. So what we're really looking at is, are the beliefs that we hold about the world, A, true, but B, are they serving you? And are they leading to positive outcomes? And without optimism and hope, we stay mired in a status quo that's broken.
So back to your book. You've written about how beliefs can determine not just what people achieve, but what they even attempt in the first place. Just a wonderful insight. How do limiting beliefs quietly shape ambition and possibility inside organizations? And this, Shawn, this is a leadership podcast, so apply it to a broad audience. But, if you're limited in your belief system, you're going to be limited in how you're influencing a whole team of people as well. I'd love for you to speak on that.
Well, it's fascinating. When I think of leadership, I think about having to lead across different generations. And there was a study that came out that basically was showing that when a leader has negative connotations about different generations' work ethic, for example, it turns out that when you look at what happens under that person's leadership, they're right. Like if they think that a certain group of people is lazier or doesn't perform at high levels or makes lots of errors or takes lots of time off from work, turns out the people in those subsets do that. And if you look at other leaders in the same organization, but that don't hold those beliefs, it turns out their teams don't have that. And so you start to think, well, of course, the leader believes that about that subgroup of people because that's what they're exposed to. But what you wait for is what happens when the leaders get shifted around inside the organization. And suddenly the leaders who are, working with people that they thought only worked for money and that if you don't push them very hard that they won't succeed, get moved to a team that was highly successful and self-driven. It turns out within a 6-month period of time that the employees on the team start to take on the attributes that the leader had ascribed to the previous group, meaning that if they thought people only work for money, if you had a group that was intrinsically motivated, but they got a leader who didn't believe that they could be intrinsically motivated, it turns out they start to act that way as well. What that starts to indicate to us is that our beliefs as leaders shape the people that we're working for, not only in terms of their actions, but their outputs as well. It's one of the most famous examples of this in psychology is the stereotype threat research, which is if you take a population, in the studies, they mostly use women or Black students, and they have them take a math test. But before taking the math test, half of them read a neutral article, and then the other half read an article that says that that subgroup is bad at math. So the women are bad at math, or the Black students are historically not good at math. And then they take the test. Now, if they're randomly assigned, the math scores in both groups statistically should be the same. There should be no difference in their math scores if they're randomly assigned. But what they find is after reading the negative article telling them that they're bad at math, it turns out after hearing that belief, they get worse at math, which is incredible that we could change even someone's ability to do a cognitive task by merely exposing them to a negative belief about the world. So when I look at leadership and leaders, and I've worked now with a third of the Fortune 100 companies, but I've also worked with the Marines out of Camp Pendleton, and I've worked with the superintendent of all the public schools in Flint, Michigan. And in the midst of watching their leadership, what I find is that when they have negative beliefs about the world, or they have negative beliefs about the people that are working for them, they find that those beliefs actually become manifest in the outcomes that they see in those teams. And what we're seeing is that our beliefs not only change our experience of the present, but they predict what happens next. So we've been working with the leaders specifically to try and change their ways of interacting with people to change the beliefs of the people on their team. For a specific example, I was working with 6 battalions of Marines out at Camp Pendleton, and we train them for threat detection. We train them to look for mistakes and errors and flaws that someone has for their dress code or for their uniform. But what happens in the meetings was at the beginning of the meeting, they would come in and they would immediately start discussing how they could deal with the 1 or 2% of the Marines that were screwing up, the ones who got arrested down in Tijuana or were caught drinking or that had some sort of an infraction or broke some of the rules. And they would talk about that for the majority of the time. And Colonel Rideout, who I was working with, said, we spend 95, 98% of the time talking about the 1 to 2% of the Marines that are the screw up. So what he did was he changed the role of the squad meetings. And as the squad leaders would come into the meeting, he had tasked them to go out and look for the greatest moments of growth that had occurred over the past week for those teams. And then when they came into the meetings, they would share that moment of growth. And the Marines, they start competing with one another, and they're trying to one-up each other about how great their team actually is. But how that starts the meeting is with all the reasons why someone would want to be a Marine and why they're incredible. And also they're learning from these moments of growth. But he said the real value was what happened to those squad leaders. That when he tasked them in a different way to scan the world for something different, for the positive, it turns out when they went and looked at their team, they weren't looking just for the screw-ups. They were actually scanning for those moments of growth that they could share in the squad meeting, which makes them look at the people on their team a different way. In the book, I describe a study that explains a little bit about how we're seeing this leader effect work in terms of beliefs, is that there's a demonstration experiment that was done in the UK where Richard Wiseman gave newspapers to students and then asked them to count the number of photographs in the newspaper. And if they get it correct, then they would give them £5. It's happening in the UK. But before taking the test, he asked them about their beliefs. There was a series of questions that were like, do you think that you're a lucky person or an unlucky person? Do good things just naturally happen to you, or does the world kind of just keep giving you bad things and you have to have grit and determination in the midst of it? Do you think you're an optimistic person? Do you expect good things to happen, or are you expecting bad things to happen within your life? Then after asking these proxy questions for optimism, he asked you to do the newspaper test where you count the number of photographs. Well, it turns out the majority of the people who claimed that they were unlucky finished the experiment, and the majority of them actually get the number of photographs right and get paid £5. But that's not the interesting part about the study. The interesting part is on page 2 of everyone's newspaper, in big letters but not in a photograph, it says, "Stop the experiment now. If you stop now, we'll give you £10." So it turns out the majority of the people who claimed that they were just lucky, that good things just happened to them, the majority of them stopped the experiment and get paid double what the people who thought that they were unlucky in life got by doing the task that was in front of them. And neuroscientists figured out why. The reason is that if your brain doesn't believe that there are possibilities for good or growth or change in the world around us, then our brain doesn't even scan for them. If you don't scan for them or you actively delete that information, your brain can't pounce upon those opportunities. So as leaders that are looking at opportunities and possibilities on a team for growth in the midst of an AI revolution, for example, it turns out that if you believe that there's possibilities, you let people know that good things could happen to teams, that you're not just scanning for the negative and you're not just talking about the negative that's going on in the world, but you're actively talking about the positive, your brain starts to scan for it and it causes your team to be able to pounce on those possibilities as well. So what we're seeing is that the lens through which you view the world predicts what happens next. But that lens is something you can communicate or is contagious to other people. And then when we change the lens of other people, it changes their ability to perform at higher levels as well.
So I want to go back to Camp Pendleton. The example that you gave of all these military officers coming in and complaining about the bottom 2% is a classic and chronic example of what happens in our workplaces, where leaders will bring a group of managers together. They'll bring their whole team together and they'll be talking about their performance. And invariably, I saw this over and over in my career. They will immediately, the leader of the group will immediately start focusing on what goals not being met, what problems being created, something that's negative, something that's wrong, and ignoring all of the massive successes that are being achieved. I think your explanation of this is brilliant in terms of how we should be approaching not just meetings with our people, but just in how we approach the achievements of the team. That much more of our energy should be going to the things that are succeeding and allow that to expand, as opposed to focusing on what's not working and polluting everyone and having everybody say, well, nothing's ever good enough for that guy. Is this beyond my experience? Have you seen this everywhere you've gone as well?
Yeah, I've seen it everywhere. And I've even seen it in my own life as well. So I noticed that early on in my career, people were hiring me to give talks on happiness research at companies, talk about happiness improves performance. But I was traveling too much and I was working too hard. And I thought that part of my way of connecting to them was letting them know about how busy I was, tired, and I just got off all these planes. And what happens when I start the conversation talking about the negative first, it only gives two options on the backside. Either someone's going to say that they're sorry and commiserate, or they're going to say that they're in the same place, that yes, life has just gotten so busy, right? No one's going to be like, oh, I just got back from Cabo and just had the best time and I was been there for 14 days. Maybe I'll go somewhere else. Maybe Aspen next, right? They're not going to go in a positive direction post that negative cue at the beginning of the conversation. And what we're finding is that as someone starts a meeting or gets on the phone or has a conversation with friends, it turns out the majority of the conversation is being shaped at the very beginning. The chemistry of that meeting is being shaped by the beliefs that are being espoused at the beginning. And if you look at the news, we start with the negative. The A block in the news is all the terrible things going on in the world, from murder and destruction. And then maybe in the C block, you get some information about your sports team or maybe a puppy that was rescued at an animal clinic, right? You don't get the positive information as the lead-off spot, which means that our brains are constantly prioritizing the negative and the threat information. And as a result of that, we're eliminating the possibility of our brain using the positive as fuel to believe that my next step is the right one. So I worked with a level 1 trauma hospital, and they realized that this was a problem because when people would come to their meetings and they would, finish their surgeries and their notes, and they need to do them, and they are coming into these meetings, they found that the majority of time they would start the meeting and the leader would complain about, well, here's the problems we're seeing in insurance, and people are using our emergency rooms, and we've got this negative patient that we're having to deal with. And it was all this heavy negative weight at the beginning of the meeting when they're already feeling this negativity within their life as well, right?
Right.
So what they decided, there's fantastic research that you know about, that I've been writing about, that talks about how when our brains are positive, we perform at higher levels. We can actually correlate the optimism levels of a physician and a nurse to the patient's safety ratings. So once you get that information in front of people, the next question those leaders have to ask is, okay, if we believe that a positive brain leads to positive outcomes, what are we doing to get our team positive before they see patients, which are our bread and butter? So what they decided was, when you come into the meeting, we want you to have one thing that you're grateful for or one good thing that's happened for you in the past 24 hours. And you have to be ready to say it because we're going to go around to everyone in the room as long as there's 15 people or fewer, and everyone says it. We have 2 minutes maximum to do this. So they started at a level 1 trauma hospital with all this education and experience and negativity that's around them and chaos. And they would start with one thing that was going on good in their life. And they would hear that and they had 2 minutes of it. Then they would get into the rest of the meeting. They did this not only for the first 3 weeks while we were doing the research on this, but then they kept doing it. And some of the people there were like, well, why are we doing it? That happiness guy's gone. And they said, no, this is our culture. We believe that if we start with the positive, that positive leadership will lead to better outcomes for our patients. We've got the data to prove it, so we're going to keep going. And they did it for 3 years. They're still doing it. But 3 years, almost to the day that we started it, the Pulse nightclub shooting occurred 3 streets away from them. And all the victims of this tragedy came to a hospital system that for 3 years had been starting meetings using gratitude as the glue to keep the teams together in the midst of a world that doesn't look like it should. And the next morning, after the worst trauma that their community had experienced, they started with gratitude again. And they said the number one gratitude was they were grateful for the community's response. But the second thing that they were most grateful for was that they hadn't wasted the last 2 years just working with the people they worked with. That those moments of hearing the positive was building social connection, but also talking about the positive. And as you know, this isn't just soft, right? What we saw is when we tested this at Genesis Health in Iowa, when we were able to raise the optimism levels of the people on those teams, it turns out their patient safety ratings went to the top 1% in the nation. And now when Orlando Health goes out and teaches other hospital leaders how to deal with the unthinkable, they starting with gratitude.
I think it's a wonderful best practice. And, listening to you, I'm just reminded that whatever culture we have in our workplaces is inherently its own belief system. And the leaders are the ones who are forming this. So creating a much more of a positive focus. And, people say to me sometimes, it's always annoying and it's also surprising that, we still have problems that we need to focus on. And I'm like, yeah, of course you do. You just don't amplify them. You don't make them bigger than they already are. And I think that's the piece that people miss. I want to ask you a personal question. So how do you filter? What's your methodology? How do you make sure that whatever it is that you accept as a belief, do you have a system? Do you have a process for that?
Well, it's very difficult because a lot of our beliefs are unconsciously formed or held. One of my favorite examples of this is some research that came out of the University of Virginia, where they found that if you look at a hill you need to climb in front of you, that hill looks 15% steeper when you are alone looking at that hill and you're told you're going to be alone climbing that hill, versus if you are standing next to someone that you are told that you believe is going to climb the hill with you. So the inclusion of somebody else looking at an obstacle with you changes how steep the picture of the hill looks like in your visual cortex before you even decide to climb the hill. So what that means is if I believe I'm alone, hills look larger to me. And before I can even make that determination of, oh yeah, I can climb that hill or not, my brain has actually already shown me a hill based upon the beliefs that I hold about the world, which is why it's important for us to examine what are the beliefs that we hold. Do we believe that the world is for us or against us? Do we believe we're alone or we're with other people? So I see this not as I've figured out how to, an algorithm for my beliefs, and that now I know exactly what to do. I see this as a daily, if not hourly, course correction to be like, why am I feeling like I don't matter post writing this book, right? Or why would I feel like I don't matter if I don't become a New York Times bestseller, or if I do become a New York Times bestseller? How do I feel like that this work is meaningful, right? You know what I'm saying?
Yep, I do.
So I've felt in the past that I mattered because of some sort of success or some great moment with my kids, right? Or just a moment of clarity where I felt like I've helped the world in some way. And then I can lose it 2 or 3 hours later, where I feel like, well, I guess I don't matter because I didn't get 3,000 likes on my LinkedIn post. So instead, what I'm looking for is I'm looking for what psychologists look for on the negative side, which is you're looking for lack of function. So is my feeling that I'm alone right now driving me to pick up the phone and call friends? Or does my feeling that I feel alone in this world make me feel like no one understands me and that we're just devolving into an AI world in which, everyone's separate from one another. And one serves me and one doesn't. And so that's what I'm looking for in these beliefs, is that I'm trying to examine and hold these beliefs. And when I see one, sometimes I don't see them. Like when looking at a hill, I might just see a hill and think it's very steep, but I might not be aware that it's because I feel alone. But when I can look around and be like, oh, I'm feeling like nothing I do at work matters, that's going to lead me to negative outcomes and not to the place I want. So let me reevaluate why I feel this way and what I can do about it to strengthen the opposite side.
So you're just more vigilant than most of us.
I have to be vigilant. I don't know if I'm more vigilant than other people. I mean, what I do doing this research is I study the people who are incredible at this, who in the midst of things that I go to sleep at night, sometimes fearing, that they've gone through those things and somehow are these incredible beacons of light, or care for the world, or have compassion or altruism that seems so selfless, that those are the people that I'm trying more to be like, and that I'm trying to be vigilant as I look at these beliefs and be like, hey, that belief system is not working for me, right? And it might not actually be accurate as well. And we just buy into them in such, I'd say blind. I wouldn't say insidious, because that sounds like there's some sort of negative intent. But let me tell you an amazing study that didn't make it into the book that came out this January from Yale University. They did a study of 11,000 seniors over a 12-year period of time from 65 to 77. And we believe that as you go from 65 to 77, you decline mentally and physically. We don't even put that in the belief category. You'd be like, Shawn, that's the scientific fact. And we know that there's cell death, and we know cells get older, and we know that there's mental and physical decline. And that's exactly what they found in the study. They found that the majority of people and the average person decline mentally and physically from 65 to 77. But they also found that 32% of the seniors on the same cognitive metrics had better scores at 77 than they had at 65. 32%, 1 out of 3. 1 out of 4 of the seniors had better physical metrics on the same tests that they were giving them, brisk walk, all of these different types of things, counting back from 7, concentration, memory, the mental and physical tasks they were having them do. 26% of them had improved by age 77. So I'm not arguing that there's not a decline as we get older. What I'm saying is that for 1 out of 3 of these seniors and 1 out of 4 of these seniors, that the mental and physical decline didn't occur in the period that led up to age 77. And in fact, they actually got better. So they went deeper into the research to find out 1 out of 3 people do the opposite of what we thought was a scientific fact. And they found that the only differentiating factor was whether or not that person believed that as they got older, that there is deterioration and they became more useless in society, or they believed the growth was possible. And if they believed the growth was possible, they had a higher likelihood of ending up in that 32% of the seniors. Our positive beliefs don't guarantee these positive outcomes, but they propel us towards them. And if we believe that, oh, I'm getting older, so you know what that means. Like I've heard 22-year-olds say this, well, I'm getting older, my back hurts.
I have too.
Right? And it drives what this research is showing us. That belief, I would want to catch. I would want to be vigilant every time I think to myself, well, that's a senior moment, or I'm just getting older. All of those beliefs are actually yielding negative outcomes or increasing the likelihood of them. So that's what I'm looking for. Are there other beliefs aside from these aging ones that are holding me back? And I think that there's a lot of them that I allow myself to buy into about like personal worth, for example, like my value to society, that I have to constantly battle.
Well, you're a human being, Shawn, so I appreciate your being candid about that. This, by the way, listening to you reminds me of somebody you mentioned in your book, Ellen Langer, her work on changing people, the music they're listening to, and the books that they're reading, the magazines that are in front of them, even the food that they were eating. She did the experiment and found that people actually became younger as they were exposed to younger ideas and influences and even beliefs. So that's fascinating. The other thing that's fascinating, you've brought up AI a couple of times. I just heard the story, the head of AI development at Microsoft this week came out and said within 18 months, every white collar job's going to be wiped out. It doesn't matter what you do. If you sit at a desk, AI is going to be able to do it. I mean, obviously really dystopian. And interestingly, he's creating the technology that's going to do this. But in China, their perspective is this is just another technology that we as humans are going to adapt to. And that just like all of the previous technology, it's going to make lives better and have a positive outcome. And I find it really interesting that we have such disparate beliefs, but it's to your point, what you want to accept. Look what we're doing in America. We're just throwing people's careers away left and right. Meta, Microsoft, Google, they've all done this in the last 6 months to a year where they're just saying we can forfeit people at the expense of AI without a blink. And I don't know that we necessarily have to do that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think that our fear oftentimes drives us to not look for possibilities in the midst of it, just like we saw with the newspaper study, is that if we only see detriment coming from AI, then we're not scanning for the ways in which this AI might be able to improve our work or be able to improve the quality of life. Now, I'm certainly not saying that AI is going to automatically lead to only positive outcomes. I think that there's a lot of things that we're struggling with and we're looking for worth. A lot of my value comes from my ability to write, and ChatGPT can write very well, can communicate information sometimes in clearer ways than I was trying with my scattered emotional thoughts. So I think that what we're trying to do in the midst of this is to realistically assess the present, but maintain the belief that eventually my behavior is going to matter when I'm linked to the right people, which is what we've seen with every technological revolution up to this point. And I think that we have the potential to keep going in that direction as well. The only alternative is the descent into the negative, which we've actually seen within this world. I mean, burnout, anxiety, loneliness, and depression are at historic highs. And this is occurring. We thought things would get better after the pandemic, and the numbers actually got worse. But the biggest problem isn't that. The biggest problem, I think, is the one you identified, which is I think we've given up hope. I think we've given up hope that things are going to get better, right? And I think that a lot of people, I saw a similar article that was in the New York Times, basically saying that China's embracing AI where Americans are hating it and are pushing against it. I mean, if I'm looking at this just from a psychological perspective, we can predict which group is going to have the better outcomes on the backside of this. Will there be anxiety and lack of scanning for possibility, or will there be optimism and a scanning for possibility? And we know from all of human history what happens next.
It's interesting. I just wrote an article about this. It hasn't come out yet, but a client told me, I said, well, it's a technology company and they've got a very small adoption of AI. And I said, well, if I were to sit around and talk to them, what do you think that they would say? And if they would give me the truth. And she said, the truth is that they're afraid that they're training their replacement, which comes down to a leadership problem. Because if you've created the environment where people feel that you're just advancing technology that's going to obliterate you, you're not going to put a lot of energy into that. So it doesn't surprise me that in China, where they have a totally different mindset about it, that they're like, hey, the sooner I learn it, the better I'm going to be off, as opposed to the sooner I learn it, the faster I'm going to lose my job.
Right.
Wow. Okay. In your work, you outline 7 core beliefs that are strongly predictive of success, health, and well-being. These are 7 beliefs that you believe we all need to embrace. Number 1, my behavior matters. Number 2, I am grateful. Number 3, I matter. Number 4, I have something to give. Number 5, I am not alone. Number 6 is my work is meaningful. And number 7, there is something greater than me. So walk us through why these 7, how you got there, and maybe pick 3 or 4 that you most want to stress that leaders should be embracing themselves.
So what I did was I went back through, not only through psychology, but I was trying to look back as much as I could through great literature and through politics and, through history. There's too much, obviously. So I'm taking large swaths of information and trying to distill it down. But what I was looking for themes. Were there themes of that people held in difficult situations that had caused them to thrive when we would have expected them to go through some sort of demise? Or what were the characteristics we constantly valued in heroes? Or what were the belief systems that were the most predictive of performance outcomes? And I kept finding, I wasn't looking for a certain number, but I kept coming back to these 7 umbrella categories. The belief my behavior matters. Of course, we see all throughout the optimism research or self-confidence research. I'm grateful. That's the same research we saw in the happiness advantage, which is when the brain is positive, we get better business and educational outcomes on the backside. Things like I matter, or I have something to give, or I'm not alone. That those were the differentiating factors where if you could take the same person, you take the same employee at the same company that's letting people go, same company, same economy, same pay, same upbringing, but you change the belief that I matter inside that organization, and the retention rates change dramatically versus I don't matter, right? We did this in LinkedIn. We had them write a 2-minute positive email or text message praising or thanking someone at work. And we found that if someone received 3 touch points of praise over a 6-month period of time at LinkedIn, the retention rates went from 80% to 94% for new hires. Same building, same pay, same economy, but a 14-point swing in whether or not they wanted to stay at that organization. And the reason for it is that they not only believed that they mattered because they were getting these notes of praise, but also they believed that their managers believed that their behavior mattered, right? They felt that they weren't alone in the midst of this. And that changes the retention rates by 14 points. Now, I'm working with World at Work right now, and we were looking at their benefits and comp. And what we just found in a large study that we just did over 10,000 different employees is we found that 73% of people were actually satisfied with their benefits and compensation, and 75% of them were actively looking for new jobs. So we thought if you could pull the right levers like benefits and comp, then people would be engaged to work, and that our job as leaders was done. But what we're finding is not just benefits. You need the benefits and comp to get people in the door. But what keeps people staying there is the belief that they matter, or they have something to give, or that their work is meaningful. And if you put beliefs and benefits together, suddenly you're able to impact these large, long-term predictive factors like retention rates or patient safety ratings, patient satisfaction, client satisfaction, that drives whether or not someone stays at an organization or wants to work with a bank or wants to come to that hospital. So when I look at this list of the 7 beliefs, these are umbrella categories of beliefs that I find we are using it now as basically a litmus test, that if you know someone who's struggling right now with the way that they look at the world, or they're struggling to find a job, or they're struggling at school, what we find is that usually there's an external factor, and at the same time, they're also struggling with at least one of these 7 beliefs. Because you can have all of these beliefs, but if you miss one, you still get a negative outcome on the backside. You can believe that you're grateful and that you matter and that you have something to give and you're not alone and there's something greater than me and that your work is meaningful. But if you don't believe your behavior matters, you don't even take the first step, right? So what we're finding is we're trying to make sure that if you're leading somebody, that if they're struggling with one of those beliefs, you know a way that you can actually strengthen them. And if you look at your life, we can look at, all right, just like we look at, the domains of our life, my social is good right now and my work is good, but I haven't had time for my family or for spiritual life or for the emotional life, right? We're looking at all those buckets the same way that when I look at leadership and when I look at my work, we're trying to look at through these lenses of these 7 beliefs to make sure that people are holding fast and strengthening these 7, because without them, we get negative costs on the backside.
Wow. Most of us are probably operating with a lot more than one missing out of the 7. Have you found anything like that? Have you polled people to see how they map over to all 7 and, what's the mean?
We don't have that information yet. I'm very excited to find that. We weren't able to get that out of the World Work data set that we had because we aggregated this whole part. So we haven't looked at that specifically. My hunch is exactly what you're describing, is that usually it's not one that we're struggling with. We're struggling with multiple ones of these. But what we also find is if you start to get a foothold in one of them, like I matter, that might lead over into my behavior matters. Or someone might start believing that they matter because they start to see how this work is meaningful in somebody else's life. Like, for example, if I'm like, oh, well, maybe I don't matter because I don't sell 100,000 copies of books a week, right? If I start to have that petty belief that I don't matter, if I get a note from somebody on email and says, hey, your book had an impact upon my life, I start to think, oh, maybe this work is meaningful. And that might yield a benefit that I matter as well. So they're related to each other, but distinct. But what we're finding is that there's a negative cost that occurs if we don't have all 7 of them. So there's constantly something that we could be working on and improving in ourselves and for other people. And so that's what we're looking for is what are the places where we're seeing lack of function, or what beliefs do we need to work on the most?
So I'm listening to you and I'm realizing, I mean, in your own description, if I don't have a certain number of books sold, if I don't have a certain number of LinkedIn responses, or if I'm not getting a speech this week, somehow that erodes your sense of mattering, which I think is very much analogous to just about all of us. So this idea that these 7 are gelatinous, you could feel like, oh, today I matter, but tomorrow, nope, the guy that I was expecting to call didn't call, and, some other negative experience happened, and all of a sudden I'm doubting it. So are you recommending that people print these out and keep them present and spend a little time every day just making sure that they're knocking these down?
I think it'd be a great idea, but honestly, I don't do that myself. So I try not to recommend things to people that I haven't done. It would be amazing if I had that top of mind all the time. More what I'm looking for is that when I realize I'm not feeling happy, or I'm not liking this work, or I don't feel valued, or I'm frustrated that things are happening in the world, I try to look to see what they are. And because I've been doing this, like my brain has been in the midst of this book, I'm looking for, oh, well, clearly you were struggling with mattering in the midst of a bestseller campaign, or clearly you were feeling like your behavior didn't matter because of, you were frustrated about a medical outcome, or clearly you might feel like you're alone because your spouse and you disagree on something about the family. So I think less than, having a list of 7, because there's so many other things I would probably want to put in front of myself. I'd probably put some famous quotes in front of myself instead of these 7 beliefs. But instead, what I'm looking for is more, how do I strengthen the positive beliefs that are going to cause me to perform well today, right? So if I want to do well at work, how am I remembering that I matter because I got that nice note the day before, right? So very practically, one of the ways that we do that as a family, it's one of the strategies at the end, is most of our beliefs are built upon previous memories. And the more encoded those memories are, the more likely we are to keep those front and center in our mind. So not only do we have in our house these digital frames that have our favorite photos of meaningful experiences that we've had as a family, but also one of the things I suggest that people do is simply to favorite photos in their albums, if they're not already doing it. Have a list of favorites that are your most meaningful and positive over the past several months or several years, and then actively spend 5 minutes a week. That's it, 5 minutes a week, but with family members if you can, or alone if you have to. And you scan through and you just scroll through it, and all you're trying to get your brain to do is to remember previous memories that you're encoding better. So I remember one Easter growing up, just one, and I remember it vividly. I remember the tulips. I remember my Easter basket. I remember I was wearing these bunny ears, and I remember it because my dad brought home a video camera that one Easter, and I don't remember any of the other Easters because we don't have photos from the other ones. And I remember that one so clearly. But what neuroscientists would tell you is that actually I remember the memory of that experience. And that by seeing those photos and videos, it implanted a memory of how meaningful Easter was growing up as a family. And in the same way, 2 years ago, as I was working on this book, I felt like I had been working too hard on the book. And I felt like I missed family time, and I missed the whole fall, which I love the fall because my brain was just totally engrossed in the book. And when it came time for Thanksgiving, I felt bad about myself. I was like, you didn't do a good job. You missed out on finite time with the family, and you missed out on the fall, and you should have done a better job with your priorities. And I decided, based upon this chapter in the book, I went through my favorites, and I went on Shutterfly, which is just like an online photo album website. And I started moving the favorites over to make a little photo book of the fall, of just some of the good things that happened, just to remind myself. And I had to add extra pages. And at the end, I called this photo album my full fall. And it completely changed the narrative that I was using for my work, because I felt like I had done a bad job as a leader in our family as I was doing this work of holding up to my priorities. And instead, I had this book that showed me all these things that I had forgotten about, these hikes that we'd gone on, and 3 Harry Potter parties, and Halloween, and Thanksgiving, and Friendsgiving. And I realized that there was all this meaning that my brain had deleted, and that now every fall, I'm going to go back and look back at this book. I've already done it for 1 year in a row doing this. And what it shows me is that if you can re-encode the positive memories and get those front and center, it increases the likelihood of us holding to a positive belief. And instead of thinking I did a bad job, which is going to change my work next, and maybe I won't take future talks, or I won't work as hard, or I'll change my parenting in a negative way. Instead, I felt like I had actually done a good job, and that there were meaningful things in my life, and they were propelling me forward. Even when I work hard, I can have meaning. And when you can have those beliefs, it creates a more functional outcome on the backside.
Were you trying to change your belief about it? Because you've said several times, I did a bad job. So your belief was, I did a bad job because I'm writing a book and I'm using the fall to do it. Now I've missed the fall and I love the fall. And so now I've done a bad job. So now you put this book of photographs together and it gives you a different story. It reminds you that actually along the way, you actually were present. You did some wonderful things. You actually experienced the fall in a really positive way. Were you intending to change your beliefs about you did a bad job?
I was intending to change my emotion. I wanted to decrease the negative valence that I was feeling on it. But I didn't think that by recalibrating it so that it would recalibrate my beliefs so much. That's what the chapter was about. The chapter is you can change your beliefs if you encode the positive memories better. I was just hoping for some emotional recovery or release. Like, okay, yeah, you did a bad job, but also, hey, there are a few good things. And instead, it changed my beliefs. I remember we did a similar, not experiment, but I suggested this to one of my friends. And he was like, I've always been bad socially. I'm not very good at making friends in new towns. I always grew up, I was like the loner. And his mom gave him this 2 Xerox boxes full of his childhood memories. And he looked back and he said, there were all these photos of like birthday parties after birthday parties that I was part with all these friends that I completely forgot about, and scouts and all the friends that I made camping. And then when I went to tennis camp and like my friends from high school, and then like these trips I took when I was in college with some of my friends, and my mom had all this and I didn't even remember it that way. I remembered I was a loner and no one really liked me. And that's not the reality that I saw in these photographs. And so now it changes who he thinks he is. And it doesn't just make him feel a little bit better. This is the thesis of the book, is that the beliefs don't just change our experience of the present, they predict what happens next. They'll change that person's path as they move forward with making new friends, or looking for possibilities for dating, or for making friends in a new town.
So do you look back on the fall and think you did a bad job, or did you reframe it?
I look back at the fall and think I could have done better, but there was so much meaning there. I feel like I was somehow successfully managed being productive and finding meaning at the same time. So I feel a sense of pride after that I didn't feel before.
You share a list of the most common self-harming mantras that people repeat to themselves. And there's nobody immune from this. So it's like things like, I can't do this, or I'm so stupid, or I'm getting old, you mentioned earlier, or I'm so busy, or no one likes me. Life is unfair. Why does this always happen to me? All these kinds of wonk wonk, but also debilitating beliefs. So what connects all these internal narratives? How do we get them, and how do we get out of them?
I think that all of those, the lists you just described, I'm stupid, I'm bored, I'm old, I'm busy. What they all assume is that change is not possible. And yes, I can be busy right now, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'll be busy a week from now. Or that, if you think I'm old, it's not like you're like, I'm old now, but I'm going to be young later. That belief is that change isn't possible. And what's so negative about the mantras that you just described is that they yield a belief system that this is not going to change, that I'm stupid now and I will stay stupid, that no one likes me today and no one will like me tomorrow. We can admit that we feel frustrated. Like, I can't solve this Rubik's Cube right now. And like my son can, but I will be able to solve it if I keep working at this. I am not getting good grades at school right now, but I think that if I tried harder and maybe did some tutoring this summer, then I could get better at it. Or like, my knee hurts right now, but doesn't mean it's going to hurt next week, right? I'm sick today, but doesn't mean I'll be sick a month from now. What we're looking for is we're opening up the door for possibility and the change is possible.
Well, as I was reading your book, and there's all these different beliefs that you want us to have, they're all directly tied to well-being. Has that ever crossed your mind?
Yeah, they all have a huge impact upon not only performance, but our well-being, both physically and emotionally. I think that the beliefs drive this from how acute our symptoms feel when we're sick to how hopeful we are when we're currently depressed and are trying to decide whether we'll always be depressed or whether change is possible.
Shawn, we have a podcast tradition we call the Heartbeat Round. To give us a little more personal insight into the biggest influences in your life, I'd like to ask you a dozen personal questions. They require a quick, instinctive, and brief answer in a heartbeat. You ready?
I'm ready.
A belief that took you the longest to unlearn.
That I matter because I'm successful.
Something you believe now that would have been unthinkable to you early in your career.
You will get married someday.
A negative mantra that you still catch yourself saying.
I'm so busy and overworked.
Who first made you feel like you truly mattered?
Absolutely my parents.
One belief leaders hold that quietly damages their people.
That people are the same today as they will be tomorrow.
The quality that derails the most leadership careers.
That leadership is about how other people feel about you instead of about how you feel about them.
Subject you believe all leaders would be wise to bone up on.
Positive psychology.
The quality you admire most in other people.
Confidence.
Besides love, what does the world need more of?
Silence.
A leader of any era you hold in the highest regard.
FDR.
Prediction about the future you're pretty certain is going to come true.
The stock market will go down.
And if you had a theme song, what would it be?
Test drive from How to Train Your Dragon.
Fantastic. Okay, now to the final question. Before we let you go, I want to turn the stage over to you and ask if there's any one belief about work, performance, or human potential that you most want leaders to embrace, or if there's some other idea. It's your floor, Shawn. Whatever you would like to leave us noodling after we sign off.
I think a lot of people are so focused on outcomes that they oftentimes think that things like beliefs are soft or extraneous, or that happiness is something that happens after you get the outcomes. Early on in my career, there was a manager who said, why are we talking about engagement and happiness with employees? We pay people to be engaged. And I thought to myself, I have some sympathy for that. People should be engaged if you're paying them, but also they pay you to be a manager. And your job as a manager is to get the best out of the people that work for you. And if you aren't using all the levers at your disposal, you're only looking at pay as the only lever for outcome, then you're not doing the job that you're supposed to be paid for. And that if we really want to get the best out of people, we need not only to be looking at their beliefs, we need to be looking at our beliefs as well. The belief that change is possible, helping people believe that their behavior matters, helping people believe that they matter. I work with a guy at USAA, and every Tuesday he has a lunch and learn where he invites 3 employees in to meet with them. And it's not where you have lunch and learn from him. He has a lunch with you and learns from you about what's going on at the company, what he needs to change, what growth is occurring, and where they're struggling, and also what they like in their life. And when they leave that meeting, they feel like that they matter. I actually went to USA and met with these individuals, and you hear that over and over again. It's like, he really cares about us. Like, he makes us feel like we matter. Well, we know that that's one of the greatest predictors, not only of retention rates, but also their performance that's there. So if you're a leader, I would be focusing upon not just let's look at the current outcomes that people have, but let's look at the beliefs that drive those outcomes and make sure people believe that they feel that they matter, that their behavior matters, and this work is meaningful. And they won't believe that unless we've already done that work ourselves.
This was wonderful. On behalf of my audience, Shawn, thank you so very much for joining us. This was really, really an incredible conversation, and I'm very, very grateful.
Thank you so much for having me.
As we close, I wanted to share with you that in just the past few weeks, I've spoken to all the partners at one of America's largest law firms, leaders at a major workplace design company, the owners of a large civil and structural engineering firm, and the senior managers of employee assistance programs representing some of the biggest corporations in the United States. It strikes me as a rather diverse group of interests, and the common denominator is that all of them are sincerely interested in improving their employee well-being. It's a sign to me of a great and wide movement underway, and I would love to come speak with your organization if you're ready to take the next step. Thank you to those of you who have written reviews of the power of employee well-being. So grateful. The magic number we need is 50, and I'm still falling short. So if you could take a moment to write a very brief review there, it would help us a lot. I want to thank my team who brings you our show, Mr. Ken Boynton, Carrie Finnessy, Anna Boynton, and my producer and sound engineer, Dustin Mahler. And finally, I leave you now with my 2 consistent reminders. When you lead from the heart, your people will follow, and love your people. This is Mark C. Crowley, thanking you for listening and signing off for now.